Thank you all for coming. My name is Brenda Baker, and I'm the Vice President of Exhibits, Facilities, and Strategic Initiatives at Madison Children's Museum and Project Director for the Caretakers of Wonder Project. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules today to be here with us, to hear about the fruits of our labor over the past 2 years. We're hoping that over the course of the next 2 days, we can share and learn together about what our role can be in supporting children's well-being and the health of the planet, which we believe are the two most pressing and inextricably linked challenges of our lifetime. So we're going to begin with a little housekeeping, a few reminders. So the sessions are being recorded and you will have access to them afterwards. Please use the Q&A function if you have any questions for panelists. The note, and also note, please, that the captions are available on the bottom of your screen. As you'll note, attendees will be muted and only presenters will be visible on your screen. Okay, next slide. First of all, I just want to thank our funders. Our project has been generously supported by the Institute for Museum and Library Services, with support from Nimick Forbesway Foundation, Virant, and the Huffman family. And we would not have been able to make this possible without their support. So thank you so much for believing in the importance of this work. Next slide. Next, I want to thank our project partners. We have been partnering for the past 2 years with Environment and Culture Partners and with the Association of Children's Museums. And it's been a great partnership, and it's been super helpful having these two organizations that really have a global reach to help spread the message of what we can do to support children in a warming world. Okay. And I'd also like to, before we begin, thank the MCM leadership team for their support of this project, as well as Amanda Strobel, our Caretakers of Wonder project manager, Stephanie Shapiro and Danielle Sikowski from Environment and Culture Partners, who are our fearless leaders and have organized the summit and are running the show, the Q&A, and the chat behind the scenes. I'd also like to thank all of our museum partners, advisors, and speakers for going along with us on this journey together for the past 2 years and for your willingness to experiment and lead. Next slide. Okay. And then I want to thank our museum partners. So these are the 9 museums that have participated in the Caretakers of Wonder project over the past 2 years. And as you can see, we've been divided up by bioregions. Next slide. And then I'd also like to thank our operation team members. They're listed on the right-hand side. And these are people who have supported our work along the way by figuring out what's next, creating the agendas, keeping us all on track, and setting the strategic priorities. So thank you to the operation team members. Next slide. And lastly, we have our content advisors. And these 6 folks, you'll be hearing from some of them today and tomorrow, have helped really bring the content in different areas and with their different areas of expertise. That's early childhood, outdoor education, climate change, evaluation, climate psychology, equity, and inclusion. So, all right. So the big idea for the Caretakers of Wonder project was really to activate a network of museums committed to taking regenerative climate action and building educational initiatives that foster compassion, engagement, agency, and hope among young children and those who care about us. So that's kind of been the project's big idea and what we'll be talking about a lot today. Before we begin, I'd like to, before we begin diving into the summit overview, I'd like to call attention to our project's knowledge acknowledgement. From the project's inception, we created this acknowledgement in order to recognize that it is not just the native lands that our communities reside on that are important to acknowledge, but we must also recognize that it is Indigenous knowledge and wisdom that we need to return to during this age of climate destruction. I'd like to ask that you take a moment to read and reflect on this in silence. Amanda will also put it in the chat in case you'd like to return to it again. It's 3 different slides, so we'll just take a minute here. Next slide, yeah. Thanks. All right, thank you, Amanda, and thanks everyone for taking a moment to read that. Okay, without looking at statistics, each of us, wherever we live, have been impacted by climate change and will continue to be impacted by a warming climate in the coming years due to flooding, heat, drought, wildfires, smoke, increasingly ferocious storms and hurricanes, and the associated discomforts and tragedies that accompany these challenges. In our short time together today and tomorrow, we'll explore new ways to take action on the climate challenges we face and learn how we can best support young children and families during this crisis that has left many caregivers frightened and concerned for their children's futures. Through the 6 sessions that make up the Caretakers of Wonder Summit, we'll weave together the best ideas and research on climate leadership in museums, children's health and well-being, early childhood education, environmental education, diversity and inclusion, with age-appropriate precursor climate education strategies that support our work in museums and science centers. You'll hear from Caretakers of Wonder experts and advisors and museum professionals about the work that we've accomplished together over the past 2 years and their thoughts about where we go next. We all come from diverse backgrounds and beginning places on this journey. Our goal over these next few days and years is to help one another stretch ourselves to think differently about how we run our institutions, participate in our field, and support children and families in ways that help them flourish. Thanks for coming to this virtual summit with curiosity, a sense of openness, and an experimental mindset, so that we can challenge ourselves to think about what could be, about the world we want to make. As Robin Wall Kimmerer suggests, we don't have to be complicit in our culture of destruction. We have the capacity to change. We have a longing for interconnection with one another and the natural world, and an opportunity to reclaim our attention to the things that really matter. We can reframe our discourse, use language and actions to frame the positive, create a sense of continuity with the past and future, and honor our interrelationships with one another and the earth. Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, has warned that we have reached code red for humanity. He puts it more bluntly. We cannot accept that our attention is not focused on climate change. Climate change is the defining issue of our age and the central challenge of our century. It is time for rapid transformation. With every living system on Earth currently in decline and inequity and political divisions fueling separateness from one another rather than connection, how can we, as museum and informal learning professionals, be instigators of change, turning our biggest challenges upside down and reimagining the world for children as it could be, then taking bold actions to make it so? Paul Hawken says, let's imagine a world, a state, a culture, a company, a business, a city, a process that actually creates more life, that heals the future, that serves the needs of living beings and everyone we share the planet with. Next slide. So you might be wondering why children's museums and why now? And I'm going to start really with some grim statistics first, and then kind of work backwards toward more hopeful conclusion. Current research shows that 84% of young people are at least moderately worried about climate change, with 45% reporting being greatly affected by climate change worries in their daily lives. Additionally, over 50% of young people report that adults in power are not listening to their concerns. While these studies are not based upon children in our target age group, there is mounting evidence that the mental and physical health impacts of climate change begin well before birth, which you'll hear more about in the second session today about climate change and children's health. Children are also more vulnerable to long-term health impacts of climate change, like food insecurity, lack of clean water, and the emergence of new diseases, as well as the direct effects of heat, drought, and natural disasters. Simultaneously, there's growing public interest in addressing these challenges. Presently, 78% of people in the US want schools to teach about climate change, and 71% believe that future generations will be harmed by climate change in their lifetimes. And yet, given the dire warnings, there have been few efforts to support children from birth to age 8 and their families as they navigate an uncertain future. So that is where those of us serving young children can step in. We know that climate change is a threat multiplier, meaning that every other problem the world faces is exacerbated by climate change, including poverty, food insecurity, inequality, biodiversity loss, negative health outcomes, and more severe weather, etc. And its impacts on young children is disproportionate. Children are more vulnerable to long-term health impacts of climate change. Let's see. In fact, children under the age of 5 bear nearly 90% of the global burden of disease brought on by climate change. Next slide. And even worse, mounting evidence shows increasing mental anguish or eco-anxiety among children, those likely to suffer most from the impacts of climate change. The American Academy of Pediatrics issued a policy statement warning that climate change poses threats to children's mental and physical health, and that failure to take prompt, substantive action would be an act of injustice to all children. Climate change is harming youth's physical and mental health when they are directly impacted by disasters such as wildfire and extreme heat and severe weather events, disrupting normal life and separating people from communities. But there is broader impact in even those who have not yet suffered deeply themselves. There is general anxiety about the future with the looming climate crisis and feelings that it is hopeless. There's frustration, depression, and isolation because adults, including parents, professionals, and especially elected officials, don't talk enough about the crisis, don't take youth concerns seriously, and aren't taking the necessary actions to make a difference. Next slide. But as you'll hear Dr. Jonathan Patz say in the session on climate change and children's health, climate change is the biggest health opportunity the world has ever known. It is our job to reframe the way we think about solving the problems and to act boldly on behalf of children. What many of you already know about on this call is that museums serving young children are scrappy, we're collaborators, and we're visionary thinkers who always put children's best interests first. What we do know is that climate change, adaptation, and mitigation requires new tools in collaboration, experimentation, and problem solving across all sectors of society. Museums and informal learning environments among them. Museums serving young children know how to do this work implicitly. We're collaborators, instigators, visionaries, and we care deeply about the futures of the children we serve. We model care in everything we do. Indeed, museums serving young children are ideally suited to be catalysts for engaging the public in age-appropriate climate activities and to walk the talk of what care for children and their futures look like. We think big and always put children at the center of our work. Climate change should be no different. Next slide. We also know that young children have been left behind in a nation that's putting a lot of emphasis on older kids and their feelings about climate change. There are relatively few resources for young children and caregivers in the climate conversation, yet their worries are heightened and sometimes invisible. We know that even young children know about climate change and have varying degrees of fears about what they see or hear through social media, television, or experience in their own communities, even if they never talk about it directly with their caregivers. Even if it is never expressed verbally, children are depending upon us to be the grown-ups in the room and step up to our collective climate challenges and take action. So next slide is basically our response as Caretakers of Wonder. Actually, we'll leave it on this one for a minute.
Oh.
Sorry, go back, Amanda. Sorry about that. We took the question of what do children need in a warming world and came up with these 3 buckets, again, with children at the center. And this is what all children's museums do. We put children at the center. We've determined that children need caring and engaged adults, and we need museum professionals that understand children and can help navigate that conversation between caregivers and adults. And then these are the 3 buckets that we have determined through our research that we need to focus on: hope and collective action, nature and well-being, and empathy and resilience.
Brenda, you have about a minute left.
Okay, I'm going to carry on. Next slide. We're going to skip we're going to skip the next couple of slides. Skip these. These will be in. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is of all of these areas of that we've focused on in the climate action playbook: hope, empathy, resilience, and health. Can you go back? Today, we're going to also focus on what's next in the summit. I know many of you are going to be caring about what we do next. These are the things we're working on now: climate action playbook and toolkit. We're next phase is we're working with the National Endowment for the Humanities on a climate smart grant, and then we're working on phase 3 and beyond. Next. Today, the summit, we have 3 sessions that are 50 minutes each. Next one will be Go Green and Prosper. Next. All right. And then we're going to have a 10-minute break between each session. So without further ado, I'm going to move on to if summit evaluations will be coming in the mail to you by Peter Wardrop, who's our evaluator for the project.